Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I've been debating about whether to post this or not, but I've finally decided that it's been long enough for me to talk about this. This happened to me and my mom a few months ago, back in October. It happened in a very rural part of New Hampshire, like a side road on a side road type of neighborhood. It was pouring out, as it had been raining for pretty much the whole day. My mom had just gotten back from down the street in my sister's car, and I was on the couch in the living room when suddenly I heard the doorbell ring. Our front door has a big glass pane in the front, so we can look out from the inside, and someone can look in from the outside. Through this window pane, I see a man. I didn't get a great look at him, as I didn't have my long distance glasses on. The man noticed that I had seen him, and waved as if trying to be friendly. For the rest of this post, I'll refer to him as Jack. I got up, and thought about opening the door for Jack, but relented, as I couldn't properly see who it was. I didn't want to let a stranger into the house. Instead, I went down the hall to my parents' bedroom, where my mom was getting ready for work. She asked what was up, and I explained to her that a man in a poncho was outside of her door, and wanted to talk to us. She went as white as a ghost. Immediately, she stopped getting ready, closed and locked the bedroom door, and started checking the windows to make sure they were locked. I asked her what was going on. My mom explained that as she was driving home, she had seen this Jack guy. He had been standing, motionless, on the side of the main street. As soon as my mom turned down our road, he started to walk, presumably to follow her. She said the encounter was weird but thought nothing more of it. Why would someone be out in the pouring rain, down a back road in the afternoon? It was like he was waiting for something. I started to panic as well. My mom called my aunt. The two were like best friends, and asked what she should do. My aunt told her to call the police immediately, and so we did. We proceeded to pace around the bedroom, frantically looking out the windows to see if we could see this Jack guy. From where the bedroom was angled, it was impossible to look at the front porch and see if he was still there, but we were desperate for anything. After what felt like hours, we finally saw a police car pull up. They carefully unlocked the door and went down to let the officer in. We explained what we saw, and he agreed to do a scan around the neighborhood. As he left, I noticed there was something on the doorknob. I took it off, and it was a political advertisement for a candidate that was running for office. It's possible Jack was just campaigning for the candidate, but there are a lot of holes in that story. It was pouring out, so why would you go door to door? And why would you go that route in such a rural neighborhood? The houses are so far apart, you barely make a dent on foot. The time doesn't make sense either. Sure, I and my mom were home, but it was about 4 in the afternoon. Most people would still be at work, so you'd probably get no response from knocking anyway. Eventually, the officer returned. He had found the guy down the road and had questioned him. This Jack guy was able to ID himself, and he claimed that he was a political campaigner and was just knocking on doors for that reason. When probed further, conveniently enough, Jack couldn't provide any other door signs, as the one he had left on our house was the last one. That makes the campaign story even more absurd. Our house is in the middle of the street. It's not like we were the last by any means, so why wouldn't you bring enough for the whole street? Even the officer pointed this out to us and said that it was unusual behavior. Although the officer was suspicious of him, there wasn't anything he could do about it, as there was no way to prove intent. He told us to be alert and do not hesitate to call if the man returns. Fast forward a few weeks, and I start noticing that a police car seems to be permanently stationed down the road from us, about a 3-minute drive. I got curious and asked my mom about it, and she said that there were multiple break-ins into the houses down the road, and the police were doing a sort of sting operation. The Jack man encounter and the break-ins may be unrelated, but considering how Jack acted, I have a sinking feeling that they are connected. I'll start this by saying I am a 29-year-old female from a small town in northern Tennessee, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and the kind where you have to drive 30 minutes to an hour to a job that pays a living wage. So when my dad started his new job around 9 years ago, he found out he was working at the same place as a friend he knew growing up, Barry. I'll also tell you that I was bullied a lot growing up, so I took compliments as jokes mostly. So when I first met Barry, he would compliment me and tell me how pretty I was. I was 20 at this time, and I always thanked him for the kind words. As time went on, the compliments got more intense. He would say he'd love to be with a woman my size. I always laughed it off and never said anything. This went on at company picnics and holiday parties I went to with my dad for about 4 years. Then I got a job with the same company, in the same department as Barry. Things were okay for the 3 months months he trained me. He still complimented me daily and I thanked him for the compliments. After my training, I went to night shift and only saw him for the 30 minutes of overlap per shift. Then 7 months into the job, my boyfriend and I broke up. Barry was sympathetic at first, then became a different person. His compliments became more focused on my body and not my face. He would stare at certain body parts while speaking to me and cock his head to the side while standing behind me if I bent down to pick something up. When I became single, he would also ask me about my preferences in the bedroom, if I'd be with a man of his age, which was early 50s, or a man of his size, 5'11" and 300 pounds. He'd become frustrated when I told him no. Declining everything he asked me never stopped him. He just upped his game. He'd start talking about me and my body to other people at work and asking them questions about me or trying to get them to ask me the questions he wanted answers to. He did this numerous times to my best friend, who will call Jay for privacy reasons. Well, luckily for me, Jay just so happened to have a massive crush on me. He'd never do anything Barry asked of him, and he always told me everything Barry said or asked. This continued on for around 8 months, and then Barry came to night shift, so my 30 minutes with him became 8 hours. He would start telling me all about his relationship history, unprompted. The questions, comments, and staring never stopped. To give you a small example, this man asked me if he won the lottery would I sleep with him for money. I said no. He offered me $1,000 one time to screw with him and I said no. I told him there is no amount of money in the world to make me sleep with him. He got mad at that. He'd ask for nude pictures, which I said no to. He'd ask Jay to try to sleep with me and take pictures and videos. He also said no. This all led to me being constantly stressed out and always looking over my shoulder to see if he was staring at me when I had to bend over to pick up something or if I had to reach for something. I did that to try and make him stop staring, but it didn't matter, he still did. I stopped talking to him. I stopped being in his vicinity. But it continued. His comments were just to other people in the building, mainly Jay. It came to a breaking point one week when my supervisor told me that my department had to work one weekend alone, just Barry and myself on our shift. I begged him not to make me come in. I told him I would call out and take a point or whatever I had to. I told him how scared I was to be alone with that man. I told him no man should be alone in a building this size with a woman, period. He listened and canceled the overtime, and he made sure I was never alone with Barry without a third person around. I finally broke down and told upper staff about it all. That turned out to be a waste of time. It continued for 6 more months, but thankfully I was on medical leave for surgery for 2 of those months. Then in November of last year, the right person on my shift heard me crying and complaining to Jay about everything before going home one night, and they complained to upper staff on my behalf. They finally opened an investigation. They asked me a ton of questions and my answers filled up 2 notebook pages front and back of just the comments and questions from him over 3 years. They asked Jay a ton of questions and a few other people who worked around us, and 3 days later, he was finally let go for harassment. He threatened me the day they put him on suspension for the investigation, and he was banned from company property unless he wanted to be arrested. I filed a no contact order against him and haven't heard from him in over a year. Jay finally told me that Barry had admitted to him at one point shortly before he was let go that if he ever got me alone, he was going to assault me and do ungodly things to me and then just leave my body somewhere. So I am extremely grateful to my supervisor for not letting that happen to me. I had to type this out twice to get my thoughts in order. But the thing that bothers me a lot about all this, Barry had a daughter a year younger than me and she had nothing to do with him when I knew him. I can't help but wonder what abuse he possibly put her through growing up. It has been over a year since this all came to an end. I'm no longer scared at work. I'm not on edge or stressed out. But as long as Barry is living and breathing in my hometown, I will not live there. And he's made a lot of enemies in that small town because of this. That happens in small towns when your parents know everyone, including the sheriff. Oh, and about Jay, his massive crush paid off and we're now dating. I've never felt safer with anyone in my life. So Barry, the pervert who made my work life suck for 3 years, let's never meet again. And to any other girl or woman who is being harassed at work, don't be afraid to speak up. I promise you it's worth it to tell someone. Every day I walk home from school with my friend because she lives only a little bit away from me, so our routes line up. At the start of the school year, we noticed there was a man usually looking at us from his window while we walked home from school. Found it a little weird, but ultimately didn't think much of it. A few months ago, after the heat of summer died down a bit, he started sitting out on his porch when we were walking by. Usually he would just smile at us. Sometimes I smiled back, but I usually just ignored him. One day as I was walking by his house, he waved to me from where he was sitting. I stopped and waved back at him and told him him to have a nice afternoon as I walked past. It felt a little weird because he didn't reply, but eventually I forgot about the whole thing. Once when my mother was at work and I was alone at our house, I noticed him walking past my house several times through my window. I felt very creeped out and uncomfortable. I considered talking to my parents about it just in case, but I ultimately convinced myself he wasn't doing anything wrong, so it didn't really matter. Yesterday I walked home from school alone because I stayed behind with some other kids outside the school for a few hours since we had art club that day, and I didn't want to walk home just to have to come back fairly soon after. I had just bought myself a nice pair of wired headphones a few weeks with money I've been saving up for a long time since I don't have a job. I was playing them over one ear as I was walking home. On the way home there is a public lot with a stable on it that I like to cut through to get into my yard as quick as I can rather than walking around the property. Sometimes people like to hang around it to meet up, but there wasn't anyone on it that I could see. As I rounded a corner on the stable, someone grabbed the back of my shirt. From the way they were grabbing it, I could see part of their hand. I jerked forward and they grabbed the top part of my headphones. The wire was at the bottom part of my neck and it got stuck for a moment, and I remember feeling like if I couldn't get away something very bad was going to happen. The wire eventually snapped and I took off running as fast as I could, screaming. They let go of my shirt and I hopped the half-length fence to our property and I ran as fast as I could out onto the sidewalk in front of my house because I was worried that I would take too long on the lock if they were following me. By the time I actually got to the sidewalk point, I was crying and I felt like I was going to collapse because I was so scared. When I looked over my shoulder, I couldn't see anyone, but I kept running until I reached my friend's house in case whoever was there was still around. When I got there, I was in tears and it took a bit to explain the situation because they couldn't understand me. I tried calling my mother, but she wouldn't pick up the phone. My friend's mom called the police and they came to check things out. There was nobody at the stables and they told me that it was most likely some kid trying to mess around, but they escorted me home to where my mother was waiting for me anyways. I didn't tell them about the old man because I was worried they would think I was crazy considering he hasn't technically done anything, but there's something in my mind that keeps telling me that it was him who grabbed me at the stables. When I was walking home from school today, I brought a screwdriver with me in case I needed to defend myself. I also had my friend with me. My mother offered to pick me up from school, but I was worried that if I had shown how the encounter had affected me, then it would make things worse. I also avoided the stables and my friend made sure I made it to the door. The guy on his porch wasn't there today and I'm still not fully sure if it's him or not. I feel terrible that my headphones broke, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if they didn't. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. To start, I am a woman in my early 20s and I work as a cashier at a grocery store. I talk to hundreds of people a week. I should have knew something was off when he first came through my line about 6 months ago, but my job is to be friendly to people, so I treated him like every other customer. He was obviously down on his luck, and when I asked the usual question of, "How's it going today?" he proceeded to tell me a whole sob story. His wife had apparently kicked him out of the house. In his words, apparently because she was having a psychotic breakdown. Should have been my first red flag. He was houseless, lonely, and hungry. I felt bad for him and attempted to sympathize. He was trying to buy a hot roasted chicken, but our government programs in this state don't cover hot food for some reason. So I did some cashier magic and changed it so his food stamps would cover the chicken and he'd have a hot meal that night. This was my first mistake. Although he was extremely grateful, this also was apparently a defining moment for him. Every Monday he proceeded to come through my line and buy a hot chicken. I genuinely thought I was just doing something nice for someone going through a hard time. He always ended up trapping me at my register with conversation. At first it was to complain about his ex's psychotic behavior. He called her a narcissist and crazy. I just listened because I had nowhere to go. I was at work after all. After a while he got over it and moved into a hostel of some sorts. He was somewhat more stable, but also obviously depressed. He always told me I cheered him up and he enjoyed talking with me. I told him that I did as well. Maybe that wasn't the right thing to say, but I really did at the time. He would also occasionally ask what my shift was / when I got off work, but I was too naive at the time to see the harm in the question. Eventually he was very excited to tell me he got a hold of a used keyboard and was excited to be playing and writing music again. I told him that was awesome and that I also played the piano. Something must have clicked in his brain because now he had something to relate to me about. Every conversation we had from there on, he was encouraging me to play piano again and telling me I'd be a great music teacher, even though he'd never heard or seen me play. I nodded and smiled and did my job. I really thought the conversation topic was innocent enough. Then, one day, he asked for my email. This is where I feel I really screwed up. Even though it was a burner email and never planned on responding, I gave it to him. He was sending me music he liked and music he wrote, and I never responded to him. I knew it was upsetting to him, but at this point something felt weird and responding would have been opening another line of communication communication with him. I kind of had my fill at work already. At some point he also asked for my number, but I declined giving to him. He said he finally wanted to have a real conversation with me, even after never responding to his emails once. I should mention, my coworkers always thought the interactions he had with me were a little too personal and lengthy. Someone even called him a creep one day, but I brushed it off. I was just being friendly to someone who was down on their luck, so I thought. Eventually everything my coworkers were saying was starting to ring loudly in my head. I found myself avoiding him. He was sending me emails at least once a week and I never replied. I knew he'd come in on Mondays at about what time, so I'd take an extra break then. I just didn't want to see him anymore. I didn't want to talk, and to be frank, he was creeping me out a bit. Last week, one of the busiest weeks at the grocery store, the week before Thanksgiving, I couldn't avoid him and he came through my line. He only bought a bag of chips, very clearly just wanting to talk to me, and waited in line for 5 minutes instead of going through the express registers. I gave him short answers and tried not to engage too much. He told me I had saved his life and had somehow helped completely turn it around by being his cashier at the grocery store. This is something he has said before, but this time he told me he had wrote me a song to return the favor. I didn't know how to react, but in the moment I said I'd let him know what I think. I saw it in my email, but never gave a listen, never even read the email. This interaction made me feel weird. It told me everything I needed to know. He was thinking of me after he left the store. He was thinking of me while he was home. He was thinking about me while writing music. The only thoughts I were having about him were on Mondays, because I knew he'd be coming in. My thoughts about him were filled with dread and anxiety. Today was my absolute breaking point. I got back from my last break and saw him just getting off the bus. At this point, my coworkers know I tried to avoid him. I ran up the stairs to the break room and was obviously panicking. 15 minutes later, one of my coworkers comes in and lets me know he did 3 laps around the store looking for me and then left without buying anything. He was clearly seeking me out. I told her I was gonna wait 10 more minutes and would be back on the floor. So I did that, but when I got back to the floor I was just filled with anxiety and clearly looking around for him. Thank God my coworkers had my back, because I didn't notice him coming in again, but he suddenly went straight to my register. I started having a panic attack. One of the other cashiers was very inviting to him. "I can help you right over here," she said. At this point I was running away from the registers and the other cashier had stepped into where I was at. He ignored her and followed me. I didn't say anything. I was also clearly panicking and running away. He followed me to the steps yelling, "Wait, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I had just made it to the break room and the store manager opened the door. I had just had a conversation with him about this guy. He told me he would handle the next time he was in, to tell him he needs to leave me alone. I didn't realize it would be in the same day. I blurted out he's back. He was following me. Management ran down the stairs to try to catch him, but he was gone. He still didn't buy anything because he only does if I'm his cashier. I had a full-blown panic attack in the break room. I was crying. I called my boyfriend to come pick me up. I didn't want to be alone. His apologies rang in my ears. One of my coworkers pointed out he wouldn't be apologizing if he knew he wasn't doing something wrong. That really stung. She was 100% right. My coworkers comforted me. They told me it wasn't my fault and I don't need to be sorry. I just can't help but feel so sorry. Sorry I didn't have the guts to set boundaries with him sooner or tell him how uncomfortable he was making me. The store manager said his behavior was completely inappropriate, coming once a week when he knew I was working and only buying something if I was his cashier. He said that was stalker behavior. Everyone did. I ended up going home early and calling out for the next day. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 2 in the morning. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we had gotten home, he tossed me out onto our front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn to the party and it was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him, so I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside of the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, even though he didn't have many, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead I decided I would try to walk to this gas station and motel, which was like a little less than a mile away, so I could use their phone to try to call a girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. A little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I just about froze up but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me and this guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride. I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, well good. I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though, you just look like you need some help. He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and quote-unquote credentials, and when he offered me a ride again I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me and I hopped in. The radio was low. It was a little messy, the ashtray was full of cigarettes, there were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I was moving my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight colored bandana, and some other things. He apologized, saying that it was the truck he took hunting, but it was super warm so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him and he told me about his family. He was a young dad. He had a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog, and I told him it was like he had the perfect little family, and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then it had sort of clicked for me to ask him I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save his battery. We were approaching the gas station and he drove right past it. I politely said, oh, I think that's the one, but he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding. I started getting choked up. My eyes started tearing up as I was looking out the windows and watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing never go to the second location, but I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle and how it would be a lot harder to get away with one foot as opposed to two, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground, but then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared though, like there was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point and asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I honestly don't know why I even asked, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started talking underneath his breath, saying, girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me. Dressed like this, and other derogatory things. As he kept saying these terrible things, too many to type out here to be honest. I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remembered the pair of handcuffs I remember seeing under the papers beneath my feet, so I used that little, I don't know how to describe it, like scoopy motion. I managed to use my feet to scoop the handcuffs up and use my heels and toes to push them under the bottom of my seat. As far as I could, I was thinking of different things I could do to try to help myself, like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, if I ever made it to them, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them, or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be a drunk driver and we get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night, and how if I did anything it would hurt him. But I told myself that sort of thinking sort of got me into this mess. He pulled off road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side the wooded trees were closer to the road. On mine, then there was a small gap fully covered in thick snow. Before the trees thickly picked up maybe 10 yards away. He turned off the car and coldly said there was something wrong with the car and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, please John, I'm so cold and scared. I was thinking of everything I ever heard. Humanize yourself, use first names. He stared at me in this like way I can't even describe it to this day. I don't even know how to start. He got back in the car and I slinked towards my window, scared he would drag me over the console. He turned off the headlights and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting a cigarette and looking out his window and back at me and then back out his window. He heard me shuffle my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window told me if I thought about running. He had a quick way to get me where he wanted me, and oddly enough I was sort of thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car then I should definitely stay in, otherwise he could chase me or shoot me. I think at that point I sort of hit some sort of bottom of my reserve, and instead of panic, there was numbness and exhaustion. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audibly told him that my friend was still waiting for me and asked about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children and that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about and he said, "I'm thinking of what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily, he just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked back up to a cry at that point, and he told me not to cry and turned the car on, offering me some heat. I just cried and said I wanted to go home. Eventually, he started driving and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, he told me not to tell anyone or he would find me. Then he told me all he was doing was teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changes his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down out of the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped and remembered to try to see his license plate. I turned around but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fears melted away when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I had caught, the fact he said he was an off-duty cop, just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out saying there was nothing was on them. I asked if I would be able to look, and the officer said no and asked me if I didn't trust him, and I told him of course I did. The officer gave me a ride to my friends, lecturing me for hitchhiking. I never heard anything back about the report that was made, so I would try to follow up, and each time I did, they never got back to me aside from this one time I was told my case number didn't exist. But that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years I asked my friend, whose home I slept over at that one night, if she ever heard of any weirdness or anything since that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she always says no. So I sort of let it go and try to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with the case. I never heard of any other odd experiences up there. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself all of that to help me sleep better at night. It all felt really real. Even if it wasn't real, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night. This memory from a year ago popped into my head, and I want to share because I was so shocked in the moment. I realize now how scary the situation was, and it was just super strange. I, a 22-year-old woman, met my dad at a tire shop in an increased crime area of town. Not really sure why we went to this shop. It was probably around noon. My dad brought his chihuahua with him, so I took her on a walk around the tire shop while he consulted with the mechanics. The shop was about half a football field away from a busy street, with a big field in between the shop and the street, and an otherwise residential area. I figured it was safe enough to walk the dog around in the field because my dad and the mechanics were right there. However, the shop was fenced in and not facing the field, so I guess it wasn't actually that safe for me because my dad/employees couldn't see me. So I was just walking the little dog around in this field, not too close to the busy street. And suddenly, this beat up car with the windows down starts driving really slowly on the busy street. And I can tell the dude driving was staring at me. The street is somewhat far away from me, and he eventually drives past, so I'm like, whatever. But then a couple seconds later, I see the car again going down the street in the opposite direction, going really fast, and he turns onto the side street where I am. He's driving very, very fast, and he just guns it into the field where I'm walking the dog, literally jumping the curb. He's coming straight for me, very fast, and I'm just shocked, thinking, is he about to plow us down? What is happening? It was just so quick and unexpected. In my confused shock, I'm just hesitating with the dog, contemplating running away but also not wanting to turn my back on the car. Then, miraculously, I guess there was some kind of uneven ground or a hole because the guy's car, which was a real beater, very old, got stuck and a wheel started spinning. With his windows down, I could hear him cursing and take this moment to scoop up the dog, about to run out of there. Then he opens the car door, about to get out of the car. I can't remember any descriptions about this man other than he was quite overweight. Again, because of the shock, I can't even recall his race or age range strange or anything. Right at that moment, a truck pulls up beside us with 2 young men inside. It was like a construction truck. They roll down the windows and ask if this guy is bothering me. They say it loudly and it spooks the guy, and he goes back into his car. He then is able to peel out and reverse from whatever hole the car was stuck in. He very quickly reverses out from the field we're in back onto the street and takes off. The kind men who stopped apparently saw all this happen. It just happened so quickly. They were just as confused as I was. What was this dude's game plan? What was he attempting? Kidnapping me in broad daylight, obviously with people around. I'm not sure. I'm so glad his car got stuck and I didn't find out. It was just very strange. I'm grateful his car got stuck and the guys who drove by stopped and were willing to check out the situation. We chatted for a second after the guy left and were all very confused about what had happened. I can be overconfident at times about my safety, but after a handful of other strange, potentially dangerous encounters, I've learned to always be alert. Bad things can happen anytime and anywhere, and don't freeze in fight or flight situations. So many times, I've frozen instead of fighting or flighting when I really should have taken some kind of action. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.